Okay, guys, I'm going to go through my PowerPoint pretty quickly on ecology. Please feel free to stop and pause and go back if you need to look at or read anything. But I'm going to go kind of quick because I got to get it under a certain time limit. So ecology is basically the study of how living things interact with one another and with their environment. And an ecologist is the scientist that does the study of this. Habitat is a place where an organism lives, and a niche is the role or the job that an organism has in the ecosystem. For example, a bee pollinates. That's its job, its niche. All right, so I'm going to kind of quickly go through these. A population, that's just a group of a certain kind of species. So a population of rabbits, a population of cows. Communities are a group of populations that are all together in one place. So if you look out on a pasture, you could have a population of rabbits, a population of grasshoppers, a population of cows, all together there on that one ecosystem. Producers, they make their own food from photosynthesis, from the sun. So they need the sun to create their own food. Consumers consume other organisms for food, so they cannot make their own. Herbivores, eat only plants. Carnivores, eat only meat. Omnivores eat both plants and meat. Then you have the decomposers. Not my favorite organism, but very necessary. These break down the dead organisms into chemicals, simple chemicals that can be used by plants. So they are what allow us to have the circle of life. They take the dead organisms and break it down into things that living organisms can use for food and so forth. Some examples are mushrooms, bacteria, molds, worms, snails, maggots. Scavengers, those are carnivores that feed on the dead organism. Predator, these, they prey or hunt other animals. Prey, that's what's caught or hunted by the predator. Then you have parasites. So you have what's called a parasite-host relationship, and that is usually not good for the host. The host is the body that the parasite lives on. So you can see the picture of the lamprey on the fish. Those are like leeches. So they suck the blood out of the fish, harming and killing the fish. Ticks. Those can leave infected sores. Ticks can also spread diseases like Lyme disease and so forth. You see the other picture here of tapeworms and roundworms that can live in the intestines of dogs and cats. And again, killing the host eventually. Then you have the cuckoo bird, which I think is kind of a sad but funny story. The cuckoo bird lays its eggs in a warbler bird's nest, and the cuckoo bird goes off to play. The warbler sits on the eggs along with the warbler's own eggs that are in the nest and keeps them warm and safe until they all hatch. And the warbler bird goes out and gets food and feeds all of the cuckoo birds and all of the warbler birds that have hatched from the eggs as her own. And then the cuckoo birds kick the warbler birds out of the nest, ultimately killing them. And the warbler bird continues to take care of the cuckoo bird babies, even though they were not hers to begin with. So, host, organism that nourishes another organism. All right, and you guys last week talked about food chains, food webs, and food pyramids. So food chain is just one simple line. So plants are the producers, and they're eaten by the cow, which is eaten by the human. Notice how the arrows go from organism to the organism that's getting the energy, to the organism that's getting the energy. It shows the energy flow, how the energy is moving through the chain. Then you have these trophic levels. These are important. You need to know these. So you have primary producers, which these are all the ones that can produce their own food. Primary means one, so the first producers. Phytoplankton are what are found in marine, saltwater oceans. Phytoplankton are microscopic little plants, and they are the basic, fundamental living part of the ocean biome. They're very critical. Now, the primary consumer, so the first consumer, remember consumers have to consume energy from another organism would be the grasshopper here. It eats the grass, the mosquito larva, which eats the algae, or the zooplankton, which eat the phytoplankton. So zooplankton are little microscopic animals that live in the waters of the ocean, and they feed on the phytoplankton. And as you continue to trace the energy levels, the energy movement down the trophic levels, you have the primary, like we just said, consumer. Then you have the secondary consumer. Then you have the tertiary. Tertiary means third consumer. And then you have the quaternary, the fourth consumer. So food chains are pretty simplistic. But then when you join food chains together, you get a food web. This one's pretty simplistic, but they can get pretty complex. You can have several arrows coming off of the same animal. So a rabbit can be eaten by many organisms. Again, just some more food webs. Hello, me. All right, energy pyramids. Do know that the producers are the main source of energy, and they're also the biggest part of the pyramid. Then herbivores and then carnivores are the top. They have the least amount of energy, also the least number. So again, on this food pyramid, down here you have the phytoplankton. They're very small in size, but they're very large in the number of organisms. And as you move up the food pyramid, my thing's haunted. As you move up to the top there, you see the shark. It's very large in size. The body of a shark is much bigger than the body of a phytoplankton, but there's not as many. They're not as abundant as the phytoplankton. Oh, whoops, sorry, let me go back. And then you have the 10% rule over here. So 90% of the energy that the phytoplankton have, they use for different body functions. And they only pass on 10% of the energy. So the small crustaceans only get 10% of the phytoplankton energy. They use up 90% of that and only give 10% to the herring when the herring eats them, and so forth. So that's the 10% rule. We'll look at it a little bit better on this one here. So here's the grass, which has 10,000 kilocalories. It's eaten by the grasshopper, and the grasshopper only gets 1,000 kilocalories from the grass. And, it's haunted. And then the frog eats the grasshopper and only gets 100 kilocalories from it. The snake only gets 10. The hawk only gets 1 kilocalorie from the snake. So the hawk, since it only got 1 kilocalorie, it has to eat a whole lot more food to end up getting 10 or 100 kilocalories than the frog does, or than the grasshopper does. So these organisms don't have to eat as much as the top organism does in order to get enough energy to sustain life. All right, so within an ecosystem, we have living and non-living parts. So the biotic parts of an ecosystem are all the living things. So the bird, the fish, the man, the trees. Even this dead tree right here is still considered biotic because it was once living. So biotic are all the living organisms in an ecosystem. Then you have the abiotic. Those are the parts that have never been alive, never gonna be alive. So things like the rock, the water, the wind, the sun, the clouds, even the air out there, the aluminum in the boat. Those are all things that have never been alive and are never going to be alive. Okay, now things that are alive or have been alive are made of things called organic compounds. Organic compounds will always have carbon. Carbon is the main element of life, and at least one hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, or nitrogen atom. So at least one of those other elements. Carbon, however, is the main element in all living things, and there's a mnemonic, we call it CHOPSIN, that helps us to remember carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, and nitrogen as organic compounds. Laws is another mnemonic. It stands for land, air, water, soil, or shelter. Those are the things that animals fight for. That's what they need to survive, and they compete for those. Carrying capacity, that's the population an area can hold without undergoing deterioration. So if you think about my classroom, could we hold 500 kids in that classroom and everybody have a happy, easy place to be educated without any injury? No, obviously not. My classroom is not made for 500 people. So it's made for to host, 25 or so people comfortably. That would be its carrying capacity. So within an ecosystem, it can't get overrun or overpopulated because the carrying capacity is set. So what will happen when an area gets overpopulated, you'll have these limiting factors that come into play. So you may have predators come in if your deer population gets too big and start eating off the deer. Or you may have sicknesses that afflict the deer that start killing it off. But limiting factors are factors that occur in the environment that help to shrink or to stop or to make the population size smaller. Biodiversity, that's the number of different species that live within a particular region. So the more diverse, the more different organisms you have in an environment, the healthier it is. So that's important to have biodiversity. Then you have natural selection. That is just simply the process that results in the evolution of the best or fit or the most adapted organism to the environment. Survival of the fittest, kind of the same thing. If a lion is chasing a herd of elk, it's not going to go out and find the most athletic elk, the fastest, strongest one to kill. It's going to kill the oldest, the youngest, the weakest, the injured. That's the one it's going to take out. So the strong, athletic one is able to survive and produce and have more offspring. And then you have adaptation. That's a structure or a behavior that helps an organism survive. So a structure of an organism, an adaptation, structural adaptation, would be like a giraffe. It has a really, really long neck, and that helps the giraffe survive because it could eat leaves that are way up high on the top of trees. That's a structural adaptation, what it physically looks like. Then you have the behavioral adaptation. So that's how it acts to try to survive. So a possum plays dead when a predator comes. It pretends like it's dead. Or an armadillo rolls up into a ball. That's its behavioral adaptation. All right, then we're going to get into succession, and I'll bring all of this up on my next video.